I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Please sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com for updates on podcast guests and lots of live events. I'm so excited that Recliner NYC is partnering with me because I found this longish nightgown thing, and I don't wear nightgowns usually, but it's like a floor-length kind of dress made out of the softest fabric I've ever felt, and the front is light gray and the back is black, and it goes all the way to the floor, and I saw it on an ad on Instagram and had to get it, and now I bought it, and I'm obsessed, so we went after Recliner in New York City, and they gave us a discount, and you can find it on my website. It's amazing. I'm so excited to partner with them. 9/10 of the customers told them that their products have helped improve their sleep, which I totally believe because these pajamas and my nightgown and everything are functional, but kind of stylish and really awesome. So go to recliner.nyc and use code MOMSXRECLINER. Mom's X Recliner, and you get 20% off, which I wish I had when I got my nightgown. So anyway, go check it out and tell me what you think. I loved it. I had such a nice time talking to Elizabeth Wetmore, who's the author of Valentine, which is the hashtag Read with Jenna Today Show pick. Elizabeth also came to my virtual book club, which was so much fun. And if you want to join, just go to the link in my bio or my website at zibbyowens.com and sign up for the book club. Anyway, Elizabeth Wetmore is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. She's the recipient of a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and 2 fellowships from the Illinois Arts Council, as well as a grant from the Barbara Deming Foundation. She was a Rona Jaffe Scholar in Fiction at Breadloaf and a fellow at the MacDowell Colony. In the spring of 2015, she was one of 6 writers in residence at Hedgebrook. A native of West Texas, she currently lives in Chicago. I'm sorry to catch you. Hopefully this can just be a minute of downtime in your crazy day.
No, I'm so excited to get to talk with you. I was telling Samantha, my agent, that I felt like we had just gotten started. And I think as much as anything else, that has to do with both my inexperience with podcast and with live events and my sort of Texan sort of propensity for, rambling on and just sort of, beating around the bush. So I'm so glad we get a chance to do this again.
A little might be repetitive.
I'm so tickled with how all of this is going. In part because I've really come to understand in the last week, I'm a bit of a hermit in my regular life, like actually really a hermit. And I've always thought that I wrote mostly for myself and my own sort of amusement. And you'll hear writers talk about who like their ideal reader is. And, my ideal reader is like me. And so I've been so blown away at what a freaking honor it is and how touched I am that to be learning that so many people are reading the book, and how meaningful that is to me. And in particular, to be hearing from people who are sending messages, via Instagram or whatever, saying that they've been moved by the book and they're all amazing, but the ones that are most amazing are the ones who are coming from women and girls who know that part of the world and who are so delighted to see characters who are so familiar to them, in literature. I mean, they're so not that, I don't know if this is literature. I mean, that's such a lofty term, but you know what, you get my point. And so like one woman sent me an email and it was a 3-sentence email and it said, "I've lived here my whole life. You nailed it. Thank you for writing this book." And I was just like, I know, right? It just moved me to tears, I mean, I was like, oh, right. This is amazing. Like, this is what it's all about too. It's not just being alone in your room, spinning stories, but, sharing it and having people be moved, so it's really what remarkable days these are. Because, all this and, in a million years of all the ways that I would imagine the world would be going right now, as my book was coming out, this was so, these are such strange days, and there's this little part of me that like, whoa, book, wait, but pandemic, let's not talk about the book. How are you doing? How are your children? Are you well? Are you safe? But it's a good thing to be able to set it aside for a few hours and be involved in in a book, and to think that my book is actually like doing for a few people here and there, like what books have done for me my whole life, right, is just heady and wonderful. So, did your family have a good holiday weekend? And
We did. Thank you for asking. Yeah. um, I think that the thing that's so great is that now we can't go outside and connect, right? But connecting through stories is what's connected people forever, right? For generations before us and generations to come. And you and the people who have books out now, they're like the main form of communication for many people. And so it's like, I don't know, it has this extra weight to it. And I think people are particularly grateful because, especially your book, with so many different stories of so many different types of people at different life stages, you can touch so many people. It's great.
yeah. Yeah, it's really, I'm blown away by how all of this is going. So honestly,
So back up a little bit and talk about when you started this book. I know when we did our quick Instagram live, you talked about that you were pregnant, right, with your son. So tell me about starting it and how it started as short stories and how it became what it is now as Valentine, this fully formed novel.
Yeah, I started it when I was pregnant with Hank, and it kind of a few things sort of all came together at once. I was teaching composition, and so this was 2004. So this wasn't the 2008 crisis, but this was the 2004 Illinois crisis, in which adjunct faculty were just laid off wholesale. So I got laid off from my composition teaching job and found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later. So I lost my health care and I found out I was pregnant, and I had been thinking about these stories for, my whole life. And I thought, well, this is a great time to just sit down and sort of hammer out these stories. This is going to be a piece of cake. I've been gone for long enough. I actually imagined that I would finish it before I had Hank. Which, like, now I look back on that and I just think, wow, what was I thinking? And so I thought that I would sit down and sort of hammer out these stories pretty quickly, and that it would be a done deal. And, I would have my son and, and look for work and sort of, go back to things. And what I discovered, of course, was that it was so much more of a Pandora's box that I was opening than I ever realized. And not just because it was hard, because writing is hard, and writing is hard for everyone. I'm no different. I'm probably a bit slower than a lot of people. You hear these stories of like Trollope or whatever would finish a book in the morning and then start his next book after lunch, and God bless him, but that's not me ever. I'm terribly slow. I have to think about things for a long time. I spend a lot of time staring out the window and I revise constantly. So I thought this was going to be a piece of cake. Of course, it wasn't. It was so much harder than I expected. And at the same time, I realized after I finally did get a draft, which was when he was about 4 years old, that I was telling a more sort of overarching story, that this wasn't just a collection. And I don't want to say just a collection in a disparaging way, because I happen to love short stories. That's actually the form I'm most comfortable with. And I think I probably started with short stories as much as anything else because I love them, but also because I had no idea how to write a novel. And so once I realized there was kind of an overarching story to it, I went back and sort of started treating it accordingly. But at the same time, I was always working. My husband and I, have always kind of hung on to the sort of lower end of the middle class. He's a high school English teacher for an independent school, and I was an independent copy editor and, sort of taught adjunct for a while. And so as I was writing the book, I often set it aside for long periods of time, either just for practical reasons, we just raising a child, or for frankly emotional reasons, which was that I found the book hard to write, and sort of in spite of not having been there for a really long time and thinking that I finally maybe had the perspective I needed to be able to write this book. When I actually got into it, I often had to step away for long periods of time because either I wasn't seeing the characters clearly or according them the kind of dignity that they deserved, or because I frankly just lost my nerve. So, and then of course there were just the practical parts of living, George and I were doing the gig economy before they even like called it such a thing, and my work life, I left home at 18 and with really no money and no survival skills at all for being out in the world outside of West Texas. And so, I've always waited tables and driven cabs and bartended and, and waited tables and bartended. And so I've always writing has always been something that with the exception of graduate school, writing has always been something I've squeezed in around the edges of my life, So on the one hand, it makes for a slow going. And on the other hand, I think it probably gives me a lot of empathy for the kinds of working class characters I'm writing about. I have a joke with some of my girlfriends that if I ever write a book that's about a college professor, who's suffering from some kind of terrible midlife ennui, like just shoot me, because and those are great books. Don't get me wrong, but I mean the characters I'm interested in, are characters like Jenny, who longs for beauty and holds up in her bathroom looking at library books of paintings in museums that she's never even heard of, and I think a lot about that. Characters who somehow don't think they have a right to, or that these things, beauty, art aren't really for them, and those are really the characters I'm interested in. So slow going on the one hand, but on the other hand, hopefully it gave me a kind of empathy and compassion, for these characters that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So long answer to a real. Are you going to be editing this?
It was a great answer.
Either way.
I'll edit a little, but that was a great answer. And so just to bookend this, your son, who you were pregnant with when you started, how old is he now?
He is 15. So I sold the book when he was 13. So yeah.
And how did that happen?
Well, for all the talk about the time it took me to write the book, actually, to be honest, and it was pretty easy. I got really, really lucky. I had an amazing agent who believed in the project. And once I finally finished the damn thing, it actually sold really quickly. And that was that was amazing. The week we submitted it in early August. And of course, by then I understood a little bit more about the publishing industry. And so I thought, well, nothing's going on in New York. It's August. Everyone's elsewhere. And so I'll brush off my resume and start thinking about what's next. The book is done, and it sold very, very quickly, and even in August. And so it was pretty magical, honestly.
Well, it's so well deserved. It's a really fantastic book.
With an amazing editor, who I love dearly and has been just brilliant in every way.
So now you're a debut novelist at age 52. How does that feel?
It feels great. Not going to lie. It feels great. And it feels right. I think that it can be really easy, especially in the arts, to sort of put yourself on a timeline of when things are appropriate and when they're not. And of course, that's for those of us who don't come from backgrounds where, art making is prized, or even really considered to be an option as a way of earning a living. I think it can be really easy to sort of, hit your 35th birthday and, no book, and your 40th birthday and no book, and your 45th birthday and no book, and to think, okay, this is over. This is not happening. It's time to sort of set it all aside and go on to, my quote, real life. And, for me, I definitely had those moments. I've had my dark nights of the writer's soul for sure. But every time I thought about giving up on this book, I was filled with such sorrow, at the idea that these women and girls stories are that, of course, someone else could have written this book, or, it's not like I'm and these women and girls could have told their own stories. It's not like I'm doing, any of these characters a big favor or whatever, but when I did think of abandoning it, it really filled me with such sorrow to think that, I couldn't do it, that I think, even when I set it aside and thought, this is it, this is over, I always found myself going back to it and feeling a great sense of relief when I did. So, yeah.
And I know you said before that the characters were fictional characters, but they were somehow based on types of people you
Mhm.
know, and that Larkspur Lane is not a real street, but it mimicked the street that you were on. Tell me about sort of taking your whole experience and mashing it up and making it fiction, and which part of it did you really want to get out? Like, which part of the story, there were so many characters, like whose story did you feel most compelled to get out into the world?
Oh gosh. I felt compelled to get all their stories out in the world. I think Glory and the terrible sort of miscarriage of justice and the terrible sort of racism that I witnessed growing up. And I was working class, middle class white kid, so my experience was pretty, in retrospect, pretty sheltered in a lot of ways. I mean, I think a lot of the reason it took me so long to write the book was that I just did not see my hometown clearly for a really long time. But Glory's story was one that I felt most drawn to in a lot of ways because I knew from the beginning that she wasn't going to see any real justice, at least not in a court of law. And I was so heartbroken by the reality of her life, that this was a girl who had endured this horrific experience. And then, almost immediately on the heels of that, her mom, who's an undocumented worker, is caught up in an immigration raid and, deported back to Mexico. So now she's going through this without, the one person in her life who could, probably have offered her a great deal of comfort. The relationship, I mean, you've seen the book, so I'm pretty obsessed with the relationship between mothers and daughters, and all of their complications and glory and difficulties. So she was probably the character in a lot of ways who most touched my heart and whose story I really, really wanted out there. She was also and at the same time, she was also the character I was most terrified to write for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is that, I'm a middle-aged white lady in Chicago, trying to write from the perspective of this young woman who's endured this horrific crime, so survived this horrific crime. So, but all of them really were so important to me every step of the way. And I tried as best I could in each character's story to fully inhabit them, in every possible way, to always be asking myself who they were. And I guess maybe in a lot of ways, the reason it took me so long too is that I was really trying with each character to give her page time and her justice, I guess.
Wow.
So,
I was struck. I haven't stopped thinking about the scene with Mary Rose when she goes to get an abortion. And I hate to even bring this up in case this is controversial in any way, but when she has her daughter with her, the daughter has to wait while she goes through this excruciating sort of emotional process, but she's thinking she can't handle another child. And then she has this experience and then gets immediately pregnant again afterwards.
yeah.
I just keep thinking, like, I think you wrote it so clearly that I felt like I was in there. I was like in the waiting room with them, and my heart broke when she got pregnant again. And anyway, I just wanted you to like talk about putting that scene in and where it came from, or I don't know, maybe just the dead endness of life for some people. I don't know. Tell me what you had in mind.
Well, and also the incredible humanity of the way women find a way, right? Like, regardless of how few resources they have, how little money they have, they find a way. I mean, one of my favorite parts of that scene is that she has to take her daughter with her because she has nowhere else for her to be, and when she gets to the clinic in New Mexico, the woman behind the counter, offers to keep an eye on her daughter for her, right? And so I love that chapter and I love that scene. And it was a scene that I thought about for a really long time, in part because it's historically accurate. In 1976, in spite of it being 3 years post Roe v. Wade, women in my hometown still had to drive about 350 miles to get an abortion, and what that meant for them then is that they had to find a way to absent themselves from their lives, and for a lot of women that was not possible and they became mothers. There's another character later in the book, Carla, who when she gets pregnant, she can't figure out a way, to get there. She can't figure out a way. She's, a teenager. She doesn't have a car, she's never really been out of her hometown, she's afraid. And somehow, the clock just just keeps ticking. And by the time, she realizes that the window is closed for her, she's going to become a mom, and I think a lot about how many women in rural areas, women who don't have a lot of resources, women who come from backgrounds that are deeply religious and anti-choice, and how motherhood is a thing that really can be thrust upon them. And some women, recover from that beautifully. And some women, it sort of haunts them for the rest of their lives, the sort of the doors that they see slamming closed at the age of 18 or 19 years old. One of the things that I didn't realize when I first started writing this book was how terribly young all of these women are, or not all of them. Mrs. Shepherd's, she's an old lady, but these women in this book are 25 years old and they have 9-year-old daughters, and so I thought about that. And then, and I hear you on not wanting to be controversial, but at the same time, I mean, the sad reality is that was true in 1976 in my hometown, and that is true today. If you're a young woman in Odessa, Texas right now, and you need access to an abortion, you better hope you can get into a car and drive at least 300 or 350 miles, and disappear from your life for a couple of days to be able to pull that off, so the money, the way to get there, the ability to disappear from your home life, and as we speak, I mean, the state of Texas has just declared abortion an optional surgery during the pandemic. So, they have, I mean, this is in court right now. They have suspended all abortions in the state of Texas during the pandemic. And the deeply cynical way it's being presented is that they need those masks and those medical supplies, when in fact, that is not at all what's going on. What they're doing is they're punishing women, and denying them, access to medical care in the midst of a pandemic. And let's not kid ourselves for a moment about who the women are who will be affected by this. Women of means, will be fine, as they were in 1976. The women who are going to find themselves thrust into motherhood in the midst of this pandemic are poor women, women in rural areas, women who are in abusive relationships, women who already have children who can't find a place for them to be, women who don't have money, women who don't have cars. I mean, and so, it's still really, sadly, it's true now, it's as true today as it was in 1976. So,
but then you see the effects of the flip side when you have young mothers like Ginny who end up saying, I can't deal with this anymore, and just, driving off. And then you see what happens to her daughter as she's left behind, and the sadness of waiting for her mom to come home. I mean, oh my gosh, it's just like there's no good outcome sometimes.
Yeah.
And yet the book is so inspiring. But I just mean, like, sometimes for the teenage moms, I don't know, just seems like very difficult.
Yeah, and yet the human spirit prevails, right?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, even in the midst of like the most sort of dire moments, there are these tiny little moments of kindness. The man who fixes her car for her.
Exactly.
The woman who, volunteers to watch Amy while Mary Rose has the surgery, So, and that was something that always kept me going in this book was, understanding in a real visceral way the way people who don't think of themselves as heroic manage to step up to the plate, again and again and again when the moment calls for it, so.
Wow. So what do you think is going to happen with your life next? I mean, you're sort of at the beginning of this huge meteoric rise with the being picked as a book club pick on the Today Show and all the rest of it. I mean, are you still writing in your spare time? Are you just like full on focused on trying to get this book in the right hands? What's on your plate?
Well, I'm a fan of the notebook. About 5 years ago, I started writing in longhand again because I was having a particularly sort of nasty case of writer's block, and I decided to pick up a notebook, these little $1.50, Mead notebooks, and start writing longhand again. And what I found is that I almost always start things longhand now. So I'm about to finish this notebook. I'll probably finish it today. It's got like 2 pages. And I'm going to tell you, I was joking to George last night that this is one to burn in the backyard, because if there are 5 or 6 pages that are salvageable for fiction writing, I will be lucky. Mostly this notebook is just just me rocking back and forth in the corner, longhand, But so yeah, I'm working on a couple of short stories, which is really one of my passions. And while I was writing this book, I actually wrote two complete collections of short stories that are unrelated to this. Although one is still set in West Texas, so I guess it's related in that way. And I'm eyeballing the first 100 pages of the next book, which is going to be set in Odessa with some of these same characters, only a bit older. And it begins in the fall of 1982 at the peak of the oil boom and ends in the spring of 1983 when the entire bottom has fallen out of the market, which is a whole different book, right? Valentine is set at the cusp of an oil boom. An oil bust is a really different animal in that part of the world. Suddenly, houses are foreclosed upon, unemployment shoots through the roof. It's a terribly desperate time. And at the same time, there's an odd beauty to it because the town clears out and so things become very quiet, and I've been thinking about that a lot. So that's the next book. Deborah Ann will be a bit older, and I think she'll probably take a much larger role in the next book. Some of the other characters who were major characters in this book will be more in the background, I think. And I mean, as you can see, I'm still like sorting it out,
I'm really excited to know that at the end of this book, we don't have to just say goodbye to the characters because, as I said, they are so real and I became so invested in them and what happened. So I'm thrilled to hear that that's the plan.
Yeah. I thought I was done with them too, but no.
Okay.
I am not done. In fact, this may be where I land for the rest of my life is these women and these girls, hopefully it won't take me 14 years.
Do you have any advice to aspiring authors?
I do. I have a ton of advice. I guess the first thing I would say to writers is you're not alone. I think that there's this kind of lore for writers about the brilliant writer who holds up in their room alone and just by force of will and their own genius and their own willpower and unwillingness to give up and smarts and imagination, it turns out this beautiful work. And that has not been my experience at all. My experience is that my book would not exist without the love and support and faith of friends and family, from women who took care of my son for a few hours when he was little, so I could just hammer out a few sentences, to my husband who's a beautiful poet in his own right and made the sacrifice of taking on a second job for several years. For several years, he taught high school English all day and then went and tutored up on the North Shore of Chicago after work so that I could work as little as possible for money. So I guess the first thing I would say is you're not alone. And the second thing I would say is ask for help. I think it's really hard to ask people to make sacrifices for you and your artwork. And I think that's particularly hard maybe for women, although I'm sure it's hard for male writers as well. But I think for women, asking your family to sacrifice for you to be able to finish a book is very hard. And often what happens instead is they don't ask for people to sacrifice for them. They just try to muddle through as best they can. I wrote a lot, in the hours between midnight and 3:00 in the morning, But I guess the other thing I would say is, you're not on anyone else's timetable. Some of us just don't have lives that lend themselves to getting our first book deal, in our mid-20s. I mean, we just don't. And American literature is poorer for it when we don't have working class writers, telling their stories. So, everyone's on their own timetable. And then finally, I guess what I would say is be good to yourself. This is so hard. It's hard under the best of circumstances. But if you're juggling 2 or 3 jobs and raising children, it can feel almost impossible. And so I think there's a really fine line between being kind to yourself without bullshitting yourself. I guess I would say be kind to yourself. The work we're doing matters. These stories matter. I'm so honored that the stories of these women and girls are out there in the world, and I think they're important. And it took me a long time to do it, but I don't think the book would have been as good as it is if it hadn't taken me that much time, and hopefully, I mean, I guess you never really know if your work is good, but, insofar as I think it's pretty good in places, I know that the time that I put in was crucial. So, I guess so. Yeah, I guess that's my advice. You're not alone. I also kind of like to imagine, that in some tiny little way, every time I sit down to write, that all the souls and spirits of all the writers that I've ever loved are somehow sort of perched on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, keep going, and so, yeah, I guess that would be my advice. Hang in there. If you have faith in your work and you've got a story to tell, it doesn't matter how long it takes, and you have the right to do it. My kid, the last couple of years I worked on my book, I don't know if I volunteered at all at my kid's school for anything. So I was really intent on finishing the book there at the end. So,
well, honestly, I am so happy for you. I know I'm just getting to know you, but I am so happy for you and congratulations. And I'm just going to sort of watch in the wings as you take off. And I just could not be more excited for you. So thanks for sharing your time with me.
I feel the same. I am so hopeful that when we're all free to move about the cabin again, that I'm able to get out to New York. And when I do, let's go celebrate with a glass of wine.
I would love that. I would really love it.
And like I said, my screen is completely black now, so I can't see your beautiful face to tell you thank you. But this has been such a pleasure, and I love the work you're doing. So
thank you.
Moms are my favorite people. I'm not kidding.
Well, thank you so much.
I think moms are pretty much the most marvelous people on the planet. And yeah, it's an honor to get to do this and talk with you. So thank you.
You too. All right. Well, take care. And we'll to be continued in person one of these days.
Indeed. And good luck. And I hope you and yours all are well and, able to get outside here and there and get a little fresh air. Are you in New York?
No, we're out on Long Island.
Oh, okay. Oh, God. Okay. So, yeah, y'all got your own thing going on out there right now. Well, I'm thinking of you. I have so many dear friends in New York, and it's such a beautiful city. My heart aches for everything that y'all are going through right now. So, anyway, thank you, Zibby. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Okay. We'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books with Zibby Owens. Please make sure to sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com to get more updates about episodes like these and also lots of live events. Thanks to Recliner NYC for being a partner, for giving everybody a discount of 20% off with the code MomsXRecliner, and for partnering with me after I loved your product so much. You can follow me on Instagram at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing, and thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music. Thanks for listening. You could always email me at zibby@zibbyowens.com.